All right, Zig on the top 10 of the show, we have Chris Stamey. Chris Stamey is a singer-songwriter, guitarist, producer, and indie rock icon. He's been in groups such as the DBs. He's worked with Alex Chilton. One of his early bands, the Sneakers, he self-released their debut record, making it one of the first American indie releases. So Chris Stamey is the real deal. Chris has a new album coming out. It's called Anything Is Possible. It comes out July 11th on all the streaming platforms. We are going to listen to a track off that record. This is I'd Be Lost Without You.
Okay, we're rolling. 1, 2, 3, 4.
I'd Be Lost Without You. Chris Stamey is the artist. Anything Is Possible is the record. Available on all streaming platforms July 11th. Anywho, this is a really fun conversation I get to have with Chris and dive into songwriting and his process and examining song structures and such. I hope you guys dig it. Before we get to that, if you hear anything you like, if you can like, rate, review, subscribe to the podcast on any of the podcast platforms, it helps me keep talking to cool guests like Chris and sharing their insights with you. So without further ado, this is my conversation with Chris Stamey. Well, to jump into it, I wanted to ask you about the Rittenhouse Square.
That was a band that I was in high school. With Peter Holsapple and Mitch Easter. It was a band that had been going for a while. It began as kind of like a local super group, and I can't remember. It seems like they played Close to the Edge by Yes or some kind of prog rock in a big concert. And then the main guy, Kent Hill, moved to Texas, and the band went through a few other iterations. But it was really a band run by the drummer, Bobby Locke. There's a record that the drummer put out of some demo tapes that we'd done. I think we started at like 10 in the evening to get the cheap rates and probably worked until the next morning. And nobody in the band ever thought that those things were ready to see the light of day. But that unauthorized release is really what people think of as being Rittenhouse Square.
Okay, but those were just demos for you guys then, right?
Well, I mean, we realized that if you just give this guy some money, you can go in a recording studio. So it was, we were thrill seekers. I mean, it was amazing, multi-track tape. It was a cool studio in Greensboro, North Carolina, that was created by an heir to the Mars bar fortune. And so I don't know how much thought went into it, but there was no such thing as an indie release that would go to press and go to record stores at that time. But there were places where you could send them a tape and they'd send you back some records. I don't think it even ever really had a cover. I think it came in a paper sleeve that maybe had a photograph we took at the back of a music store.
That's awesome. So at that point, was that your first studio experience?
No, we'd been recording in the basement on a 2-track tape recorder, and then I think we got a 4-track tape recorder a little bit after that happened. Okay. But it wasn't strictly speaking the first. Okay. And actually, Mitch Easter had made had done a bunch of sessions at that studio before with a band he had called Sacred Irony, and the Sacred Irony recordings, I think, have are a little more palatable, maybe, with today's ears.
Okay, so kind of can you walk me into this point where you're starting to write and record tunes with a band? So if Rittenhouse Square wasn't kind of the first approach to that, the demos in the basement, I guess, were. Did you always, when you started playing, was guitar always the medium at first?
No, I played bass.
Okay, all right. And were you writing, singing and writing with bass?
I was writing on my family piano, but not really anything for the band. It wasn't until the band evolved to being just Mitch Easter and myself that I started writing more prolifically. And both he and Peter Holsapple had been doing this before I was really writing anything. Bass is not a great instrument for it. And piano at that time, there was no way to play piano live unless you had a big budget, because there were no piano samples or anything. You had to get a Honor pianette, or a Fender Rhodes was impossibly heavy. And a Horlitzer piano also was a lot to tug around. So basically piano was not an option then. I learned to play guitar watching my friends, and really didn't learn to play it until I went away to college in 73.
Okay. Yeah, they're deceivingly heavy, the Fender Rhodes. They kind of look like they'd be light because they're kind of compact until you try to move it.
No, it's
okay.
I hate them to this day.
They do got a cool sound, though. There's something about that electric piano sound that's cool.
Yeah, I don't know. When Herbie Hancock brought it into the Miles Davis groups, I thought that was a wrong turn, personally. But.
Yeah. Okay. Okay. So at this point, you're writing in, like, I guess, like, did writing become as far as songwriting, did that become like kind of clearer by hanging out with these guys and watching them do it?
Yeah, I'd say that. But I mean, also, I decided that the Kinks were my spirit animal, and really absorbed all the Kinks records as best I could. And I wasn't that engaged when I was in college. I would skip class and go out and play in the woods, mainly I think around Chapel Hill, and try to write songs. And I got a lot of the bad ones you write at the beginning out of the way done.
Okay. So while you're doing that, while you're in the woods, like writing, getting some of, like, because some people say it's a numbers game. You just have to keep writing songs until one sticks out of the batch. But did some of that develop some of the Sneakers tunes?
Yeah, that led into the Sneakers songs.
Okay. That's pretty awesome, though, to write in the woods. I don't know, like, I feel a little shy with writing. I have to be, like, bunkered in a room with, like, a little microphone or something. So the do in the woods is kind of, it's putting it out there.
I mean, at the same time, I was in music school at University of North Carolina. So I was, writing in the style that was all current at the time, which was post-serialist, kind of anything goes, with the New York minimalist involved in Mills College. There were a lot of threads going through as mid-century modern music kind of found itself in academia. And so I would be doing that. And then I would also be trying to figure out what Ray Davies was doing.
It's like two ends of the spectrum there for sure. Did you find like a through line between like kind of modern like minimalism and some of the work Ray Davies or artists or other writers like him were doing?
Yeah, I guess I wasn't really that fond of minimalism. It was everywhere. I mean, it would be more like, I think I like Lucas Foss and, Samuel Barber more, it was, I think in 75, I made a trip to New York and heard Television play, the band Television, and really thought that they were integrating some of those threads I liked, but on guitar and drums, and I was really quite taken with it. And I thought, well, maybe that's a way to go. So, it wasn't really my voice, but the way the ensemble played, I thought was really fantastic. And essentially, I moved up to New York because I had an idea that maybe there were a lot of bands like Television playing at CBGBs, and that was like way wrong. It was really only that band. But once I moved to New York in January 1977, well, I already knew a guy named Terry Ork who was putting out records around New York, and he had put out a record by Alex Chilton, and Alex was coming to New York, and Terry asked me if I could put together a backing band for Alex, and that ended up being about a year of recording and playing together with Alex, and it was really like that was my graduate school. I really learned a lot from him.
Like at that, were you aware of his musicality and stuff before? Were you aware of his what was it, the Box Tops, right? Was his first?
Well, yeah, I mean, you heard the Box Tops on the radio, and actually the band Big Star he was in with Chris Bell and Jody and Andy was a hit in my hometown, even though it doesn't seem like they were a hit anywhere else. But they had top 40 AM radio songs. There was a song called When My Baby Is Beside Me that was, we heard on the radio along with Steppenwolf and the Grassroots and, Cream and all those. So I didn't realize that they were kind of an obscure band. But I also didn't realize the depth of Alex's musicality. He'd grown up in a jazz, a family that loved jazz, and in a, I guess, a kind of a free and maybe a little bit bohemian milieu. Like, William Eccleston was in that circle. So, he was pretty wide open as a musician, and had also toured with the Beach Boys a lot when he was in the Box Tops, and become friends with all of those guys. And, he knew music theory. I mean, he was also, he'd learned a lot about recording and a lot of kind of crazy techniques about recording, excessive ways to push the equipment.
Yeah. Like, okay, so a couple questions on all that. One, it's kind of wild to be like, yeah, I know all the guys in the Beach Boys, but Alex Chilton would be the guy to do it. You know what I mean? Like,
I think he, this is something I've read. He didn't tell me, but he always said that the title of his autobiography, if he ever wrote it, would be "I Slept with Charles Manson," because he would go stay with Dennis Wilson, and one morning he woke up in bed and Manson was asleep beside him.
Oh my God. Oh man, it's like the more I learn about that guy, the crazier, and the more interesting the stories get. So I guess studio wise, what were some of the techniques he kind of taught you that really drove some of the gear and kind of amped up certain things? And can you dive into that a little deeper?
Well, not being afraid to use excessive compression at times. I guess McCartney had done these records like Jet or Hell on Wheels, where it's really the vocal was pumping. So he would, we would sometimes do that, sometimes only on monitoring, but it would have a different, it was like playing electric guitar through an amp. You'd sing differently if you were hearing that kind of compression. He would do overdubs without listening to the track that had already been recorded. So sometimes there would be, obviously they wouldn't line up perfectly, but there would be these random events that could then be selectively entered into the mix. And the way he would use a synthesizer, again, I think maybe he got some of this from Jim Dickinson, the Memphis producer, but it was, I guess, letting God in the room or opening the door to chaos a little bit. And also to be very precise background harmonies. And, just general solid arranging. Alex had a broad palette.
That's that's a really interesting, especially with the doubling the backups without listening to what you did before. Because I guess it'd be certain lines might accent.
No, not doubling vocal backups. I mean, letting a guitar feed back all the way through a track.
Okay.
Not doubling vocals.
Got it. Okay. But still, so did you, you firsthand witness some of these, techniques?
Well, that's what I'm talking about.
Okay. All right. Well, I didn't know if this was like he was explaining it, you know.
Oh, no,
All
no,
right,
no.
like,
He didn't explain things at great length ever, but well, no, he would. I guess it's not really true. But there was a studio called Trod Nossel up in Wallingford, Connecticut, and we had a cheap rate there through the little record label, and we'd go up there and record a bunch. He produced me doing a track called "Where the Fun Is" and "The Summer Sun." And we did a lot of things that never came out. The studio was very cheap, but they didn't even get paid the very cheap rate, so they held onto the tapes, and I think those tapes are gone.
that'd be really cool to hear some of those. I'm sure for you as well, to like to hear like how much you've like changed and grown since then.
Well, the studio actually, I mean, they existed until somebody at the studio started calling me saying, well, if you give us, and they would name a large figure, that we can release these tapes. And I knew some of them had been erased, but or recorded over. But anyway, they were definitely there. And then when Alex died, I had a friend who was said, okay, I'll pay it. And we called him 2 days after Alex died, and the tapes had disappeared. So it's a mystery.
I guess also like kind of jumping into this new record a little bit. Alex, he like had a kind of precise like understanding of some of the Beach Boys harmonies and some of their like how they kind of build up songs in that sense. Did you, with recording with him, did you see some of that?
Well, yeah, I mean, he was good at figuring out harmonies, yeah, and how to record them. I think we were just 16 track at that time, and I don't remember any kind of massive stacking going on up there. I mean, a lot of if you're talking about Brian Wilson's vocal arranging, you got to look at the Four Freshmen and at Gershwin. Basically, you're going to 4-note chords instead of 3-note chords, and that makes voice leading or the way the voices can move both more complicated and more free, because instead of trying to deal with 3 notes, you've got 4 or 5, and they can ooze into the other chords in a more unique way each time. Also, Brian would do some basic movements and then have a descant voice, one that kind of climbs in and out of the harmonies, the passing tones, and what seems amazingly rich, or is amazingly rich in those vocal harmonies on the Beach Boys records, came from the final voice that would, walk through the changes. That makes sense.
Yeah. No, like it's interesting because like I studied at Cleveland State, and like some of the voice leading stuff you learn from the rip when you start diving into music theory, and it's like it's for the experience I've always like had with that learning it is like you're just writing these things on this page. You're not really necessarily kind of hearing how they play out, but like listening to like the Beach Boys or like Barbershop, it's kind of like it's interesting how when you get these 4 voices together, like how you said how it's freeing, but also there's like certain things have to go in certain directions and have to resolve, and don't have to, but tend to resolve in certain ways. But how that like subtle but not that subtle but lush harmony builds up a whole different voice and feel for a song.
Well, I think you've got to get beyond 3-note chords to get the richness. But a lot of that's, if you're sitting there in Music 101 and the teacher's saying, okay, in the G7 chord, that F has got to resolve down to the E and the third, in the C tonic chord, or the B in the G7 has to resolve up to the C. It seems like, come on, give me a break. But it's actually, when you hear it, I don't know if it goes back to Socrates, Plato or something, but it's solid. You start to believe in it.
Yeah. It is interesting, like that, because I remember doing so many of those exercises, being like, yeah, it goes like this, but like it's like kind of with song structure. Sometimes like verse chorus, bridge chorus is like not the most exciting layout of a thing, but man, it's hard to do, and when it works, it works. Like,
It's funny that because people talk about a lot of people regard the Beatles highly as songwriters, and yet that's like AAB writing. It's not really um, tiny bitty verse and huge chorus. A lot of those Beatles songs are not. They have a refrain line at the end, and then they have a B section, rather than having that big chorus that became the deal in the 70s. And really the Beatles style, to my ear, does relate back more to the Great American Songbook, which was the same thing. You'd have an A section that would probably have a little bit of a hook lyrically at the very end of each verse. And then the B section would not be the let's take it to the stars chorus kind of thing, but it would just be another place to go. And nowadays, especially with Spotify, where you don't get paid unless people listen for the first minute or something like that, the intros are gone, verses are tiny, and you get to the chorus really fast, and it's a big chorus.
yeah, yeah. I guess it's interesting too, the medium in which music's kind of sold to the people, how that affects the ultimate output of what songs become. Do you find that refrain writing more challenging than like a big chorus writing?
I don't think I can answer. I mean, for me, the experience of songwriting is a bit of a fugue state, and I don't find anything difficult. It's just whether, when you're done and you kind of come back to yourself, it's whether it's any good or not. But I don't. You walk along the beach and you see these shells that are certain color, and you pick them up, and it's that kind of attraction. It's kind of like a child's fascination or a kind of play doing creative work. And but I mean, I that's a little bit disingenuous, because I mean, if I have a deadline, if I have to write something for somebody, or if I have to, there could be a time when I say, okay, this has to be a big chorus and it's a piece of work, and I knock it out. But generally, let's say I've just spent a year listening to Jerome Kern and Cole Porter, it's more likely I'm going to end up with that kind of thing, rather than a year listening to U2. I don't know.
Yeah, no, it makes sense, because you kind of like subconsciously are like absorbing what you've chosen as like inspiration, or just music that appeals to you. So when you are in the practice or in the craft of writing something, it makes sense that like some of the words you've heard you will use in the sentence of the song, or not necessarily in that metaphorically.
I mean, I'm thinking about my new record, and there's a song, the title song, "Anything Is Possible," definitely has kind of a big chorus, and I mean, it's more of a chorus kind of song. Whereas most of the other ones, I mean, "I'd Be Lost Without You," or certainly "After All This Time," would fit more in that. I mean, the title might be at the end of each A section, and not a big chorus. In fact, I'm not sure what other big choruses I have. Oh no, "Done with Love" is like that. It has a regular chorus. And I guess at the end of the record, there are a few.
But I like the idea that it's kind of like a non, like, it's in this batch of tunes really it's interesting because like it kind of goes back to that I mean, you might be able to direct it in a different way, but to that great songbook, American songbook style with some of them, but also like this kind of like Beach Boy influence on some of them. It's really, really interesting of like a collection. And I read, getting ready to talk with you, that with this batch of tunes, these were inspired by some of the songs of your youth that you would listen to, now going back to it with a little more knowledge of how they work. So, like, were you learning some Beach Boys stuff, like, on that piano at home?
No, I think Chopin was my thing then, but the radio was different. On the radio, like there's a song called Meet Me in Midtown, which has musical references to Downtown by Tony Hatch, and also Hernando's Hideaway, which was a hit I loved on the radio. I was hearing Chet Baker, and I think there's a little bit of Chet Baker in After All This Time.
Yeah.
My father would play and sing World War II songs because he was in World War II, and there was a whole category about couples who were separated geographically and separated by war. Songs like "I'll Be Home for Christmas" or "I'll Be Seeing You in All the Old Familiar Places." So that kind of song was on my mind when I was writing "When My Ship Comes In." I don't know. It was more after the fact that I thought I could make that claim, but I think it is true. I could go to the other songs and say, this is pre-Beatles stuff.
Yeah.
Or, well, I mean, the Beatles were out. I just never gave them much regard at that time. I was still listening to different stuff.
Well, also, like you mentioned that your family kind of had jazz around, and that would definitely, the sense of like a jazz standard compared to like a Beatles tune at the time is like a different. You're moving through key centers. There's more like kind of musical lushness to it. So I guess like with that, like another thing I wanted to say was like the downtown reference, kind of like I definitely heard that. There's one line in that tune that I was like, this is like a beautiful. It was so simple, but it was so beautiful. The pounding feet or the pounding shoes, like I think I'm saying it wrong, but on the pavement, like I was like, that like perfectly paints that whole like image of the busy street, and like with a sense of like something happening in the moment, so you can see and experience it.
Great. Yeah, I know I don't spend as much time on lyrics as I should sometimes, but every now and then that song was easy to write. And I like the lines in it too. I like the line about we can do just what we choose after dark, and I like the line about there's a toucan in a cage on the Baby Grand. Some of the is it fricative? Some of the diction of the lines I like a lot. But that song was really, as much as anything, written around the left hand of the piano, because both the Petula Clark's version of Downtown and Jimi Hendrix's Crosstown Traffic have this massive compression on the octaves in the left hand, and it just is the most earth-shattering sound when you learn to record it like that. I've done it on a million records, but so I thought, well, okay, Crosstown Traffic, Downtown, I could do a song about Midtown, and they'd kind of all tie together.
That left hand does like that bass line that really does stick out in those two tunes.
Yeah, I guess it's on the refrain in Midtown when it's pedaling the root, which is at that point is an A flat, but the chords are going G flat to A flat. So you have it's like an 11th chord on top of it, but it's a kind of suspended chord that is rooted over that really compressed left hand on the piano.
So when you were like, to jump kind of back into like kind of getting towards like you developing your own songwriting career, like listening to you describe just little aspects of these tunes, like it sounds like, I mean, theoretically, like, I don't know if it's like a post-analyzing or like in the moment analyzing this works. And like, because I feel like a lot of times with music, it's the opposite. It's you analyze it after you've done it. This is why it works. This is what's interesting about it.
Well, what I tell people is, you know, you need to get your toolbox outfitted with the tools you're going to need, because when you're actually writing a song, you just don't want to go and look something up about how to modulate or how to resolve something. And so, you know, you're going to get stuck if you might have written 20 great songs, but if you need to continually evolve in your capabilities and to find new places to go, so that you've already done that. You just, you know, otherwise you're going to go into this kind of auto hypnosis, strumming the same 4 chords over and over again, and you're going to get into a situation where you're writing a melody to fit the chords instead of harmonizing a melody. You know, songs are the melody's the lead dog, and if you're making it always squeezing it into a 4 or 5 chord progression that goes over and over again, you can make a lot of money and be very successful, but you're really always in the shallow end of the pool. This is my opinion. I got a lot of opinions, Dave.
No, I love it, because you're right. It's really like when you're chasing down a longer melody like that, like and you hear that. I feel like with like more like lush kind of chord changes and different modulations of key, you get to hear like these melodies and trace them in a different way that makes them stand the test of time for themselves, and doesn't necessarily like come to a similar or predictable kind of cadence, you know. And that would make sense to think of it as like harmonizing the melody, as opposed to just kind of what's the word I'm looking for, comping, or like just supporting a melody that's happening. And like, that's really, I like that, man. So like, I guess,
well, it's a weird world in that that's not the common practice, but it has fallen into disfavor on the hit parade a little bit. But it, you know, for a long time it would be, well, I mean, the thing about songs, and this is obvious, but it's lyrics and music. So, you know, you need to make the two talk to each other. You need to support the lyrics with the music and vice versa. It's a lot different than writing symphonic instrumental music, and it's a lot different than writing and reading poetry. But you need to be able, if you express something lyrically, you need to have some options so you can find the right way to make that hit home with the listener.
One thing too, like, I guess in the kind of the tying of the two of those, like certain like, because like I'm always trying to, and I'm sure you are doing the same thing in your own way, but always trying to learn different things from like kind of different sides of a practice to see how they can fit together. So recently I've been reading a lot about metered poetry, and trying to learn how that works, right? And trying to tie that to the idea of the lyric, and how like lyrics, like we lead on when it's an unbalanced line, and certain like shorter phrases mean more attention, immediate actions and such. But the lack there of rhyme, which kind of makes the end of the closure of a thing, makes it leading, pushing forward in a sense. So like, I don't know, like diving into like the idea of like this melody extending forward with a rhyme that doesn't happen right away. It gives you more, where my brain's turning, it's like it gives you more of a chance to say what you're trying to say before having to close it. I I don't. Do you like? It sounds like you do, and like even diving back into like your early works, like do you have a practice of just kind of like learning aspects of different like approaches to poetry or music and trying to apply them when you get into your fugue state of writing?
I'm unfortunately kind of a slackard about lyrics. I mean, I think I do things I like, but I'm not as well versed in it. I mean, Stephen Sondheim has books, Look Ma, I Made a Hat, or Finishing the Hat. There are a couple of books where he really carefully goes through how he would write and rewrite, and he digs into Oscar Hammerstein and all these other writers of Broadway musicals. And, that's a very demanding kind of writing because you're advancing a story, and often if it's a song that could be universal, then you've failed because you're not advancing the story enough. But I read those books a little bit, but I really don't, iambic parameter, whatever, I don't know it. And I do, sometimes the rhyme scheme in the second verse is totally different than the first verse. I just have never gotten to be, I've never gotten to where you're clearly at already.
I wouldn't say I'm there. I'm trying to be, I'm trying to understand it because I get to talk with cool people like you whose work I admire. You know what I mean? Like, how are they? Like,
I mean, it's really good to try to say things that are true and to not finish out a couplet with a clever rhyme if it isn't true,
I guess it has to come down to that because that's what you're saying. It has to mean emotionally mean everything to you to want to put it out there. What do you kind of like? Do you have like a routine where you like, I'm going to write right now, or I write every day, or like what does that kind of look like when you're going into like how you do, like the fugue idea where you're just kind of manically or non-manically putting it all out there?
Yeah, I don't really think of it as mania in that way. I think of it as more like the bicameral brain theory, the more right brain, left brain.
Okay.
That comes the closest to feeling like an accurate description to me. But I mean, in the mornings, sometimes when nobody else is up, playing quietly at the piano. There's a small room which is really like a entranceway to my recording studio, and it has a funny echo in it, and I can sit in there, and there's a lot of sun, so that's a good room. I used to walk around, particularly when I was living in New York, and you end up with a lot of songs at like 120 beats per minute, kind of like a walking pace. But I would, just, it's the same kind of thing like mixing a record with a vacuum cleaner on. If you've got a certain amount of noise on the street, it helps you dream some,
Yeah, that's fascinating. It makes sense that your environment like that, just kind of like how when we were talking about before, like with what you listen to, like how your kind of sonic and musical environment, you let your brain wander in, and also the physical environment that you're in and what you're doing. Like if you're walking, like that's really interesting that you found these songs are coming out at a walking tempo. That's so cool.
Cool.
Like just neurochemically, like what's going on. That's fascinating. So to kind of jump it back to this record, one thing I wanted to ask you about, so you do a cover of Don't Talk, Put Your Head on My Shoulder. And like, how did you come across like the original like arrangement for it?
Oh, well, I know the guys in the Brian Wilson band, and So I called Darian and said, do you have the string arrangement for that? Which, I mean, I don't think he had the original, but he had the original notes renotated for their tour. And then he said, well, I also have the original vocal arrangement for the second verse that was actually cut from the released version, but it's really cool because they'd been doing it live with Brian. So he sent me that. So that was easy.
Yeah, but that's a pretty cool. So did you meet him like through Alex?
No. There's a fund for autism research actually called Wild Honey, the Wild Honey Foundation in LA, and they do a lot of concerts, a lot of themed concerts. And I've been out over the years to do these benefit concerts, and a lot of the Brian Wilson band guys who were formerly called the Wondermints, a lot of them have been involved in those concerts. So, particularly Nelson Bragg, the drummer and percussionist, I played with him a lot. And on this new record is a guy named Probin Gregory. He's just great. He's a multi-instrumentalist in the Brian Wilson band. By that, I mean, not a lot of times that means you play guitar and bass, but with him, it means you play trumpet, trombone, French horn, banjo, guitar fluently, in anything really. I mean, and so Probin got involved, and there are not that many notes from him on the record, but there were all great notes. I would send him some arrangements that he would do remotely in LA, and then he would add his own stuff, and they were just golden.
That's the guys that can play that, just rip through everything like that. I don't know. I admire those dudes. Oh, Glenn Morrow.
Yeah. What about it?
So I got to talk with Glenn a few years ago when he put out his solo album, or second 103rd.
It's with the band, right?
Yeah, it's with the band.
Rachel.
I'm trying to, God, it was a while ago. But on your last record, you have a credits track, which I thought was super cool because, like, in the digital age, like, so many people don't get to read the liner notes. And, like, what a cool way to make sure those shout outs are given in a fun, like, way. But you shout out Glenn. So how do you know Glenn, and have you worked with Glenn musically on anything?
Well, I mixed a song on his last record, kind of, and reworked it a little bit. I think I maybe even sped it up or something. Yeah, and I saw him a few weeks ago. I met him when he was a writer at New York Rocker magazine, which was a New York very cool publication. And when did it start? Maybe it started in 76, 77, and continued on for 6 or 7 years. And then he was in a band called The Individuals. Yeah, I mean, I've known him a long time.
Individuals is a great band. Were you with the DBs? I imagine would share bills with those cats.
Yeah, some. I think by the time the Individuals were around, I wasn't really in the DBs. So I don't remember. I mean, I remember seeing them, but I don't think I shared bills.
And one Cleveland-related question I have for you is, you did work with the Golden Palominos. Did you?
Oh yeah.
Yeah. Did you work with Robert from the Numbers Band?
I don't think that was a little bit later. I believe I met him, but I don't think we ever played together. The version I was in was it was led by and curated by Anton Fear, who was a friend of mine for many decades, and I miss him. He was a great guy. But the band I was in had it had Carla Bley on keys, and then it changed to Bernie Worrell. It was really great. Jack Bruce, Michael Stipe, Peter Blegvad, Sid Straw, Jody Harris, and a big cast.
were there any like kind of lessons in a way like you kind of gleamed from like Alex with working with that crew?
With Golden Palominos, it was really Anton's. It, you know, it. I think that there might have been a little bit of an inspiration from Escalator Over the Hill, which was Carla Bley, using a lot of different players to create her vision. But it was really trying to make it sound right for Anton as much as anything else. He would choose. We would do some covers and that he would choose, and so it was he was the leader and he was the curator.
And I guess I got one more question, Chris. I really appreciate your time. And to kind of go full circle to like when you first ventured out to New York and you saw television, as a producer, you worked with Richard Lloyd. Can you talk about that experience a little bit?
I mean, I worked with him most recently on the last record by the Salt Collective. He's not on the new one, but he was on that last one. We did a track with Juliana Hatfield. But yeah, I mean, I knew Richard around the clubs and everything like that. And then I had an indie record label in 76 and 77 and was going to put out a solo record by Richard because he'd written this really cool song called I Thought You Wanted to Know. And we went in and recorded it. And after I'd already cut the record and it had sung it, Elektra, the label he was on with television, said that we couldn't release it. So then I went in and cut the vocal and sang it and put it out as a record of my own. And then he and Anton Fear and bassist Graham Maybe were the main players on a record I made for A&amp called It's All Right. I really like Richard. He doesn't suffer fools, I guess you'd say. And he had sat in. We'd done some gigs. He'd played with when I was playing with Alex Chilton. Richard would play, and I think maybe Alex helped him record a version of the "Hey, You Get Off My Cloud," and maybe Alex recorded a version of "Please Crawl Out Your Window" by Bob Dylan. That never came out, but I think maybe Richard was involved in that. I don't know. It was a guy around town,
Yeah, that's pretty wicked. That'd be cool to hear that.
Yeah, Alex recorded "Please Crawl Out Your Window" by Bob Dylan for a Rolling Stones tribute album. I mean, it was pretty outside.
But, I mean, what would you expect? That's awesome. Chris, thank you so much for your time, man. It's been a pleasure to dive into your career and pick your brain.
It's been really nice talking to you.
Yo, Spike Spiegel here. You just listened to Zig at the Gig podcast. Keep riding the bebop. See you, Space Cowboy. Bang.